Welcome, my name's Stephen Milner. I'm a landscape photographer based right here in the best country in the world, sunny New Zealand, and I'm here today to explain to you how to use a light meter to get correct exposures for your slide film. Stay tuned to find out more. If you want to be part of a community of like-minded people, then you're in the right place. I love challenging the status quo and doing things differently. It just so happens I take great landscape photography images and I share the stories behind them. Subscribe to my channel. Now then, if you're like me, you've been shooting slide film like Fujifilm Velvia 50 or Velvia 100 or Provia 100 or Kodak E100, and you've been having some challenges or failures around the exposures. So I'm here to help you with that today, and what I learned quite early on is that you need to be able to use a light meter well to be able to expose slide film and get the exposures that you want. And the light meter that I use for that is a Volcanic L758D, and I bought this used off eBay, and I went for this light meter because I'm able to take multiple readings, log them in the memory, and then average it out, and then I'm able to assess my scene by looking through the viewfinder, and it displays digitally inside the actual viewfinder the EV value of my scene as I go through and assess it, and that's really important for when you're shooting slide film. So to expose slide film correctly, you need a meter, and you also need to understand the dynamic range of your film. And the way to understand the dynamic range of your film is to look at the data sheet, and you can download them online. So I've got my data sheet here for this film, Fujifilm Velvia 50, and we're going to jump to my computer right now and I'm going to explain how you can do that. So I've got the Fujifilm Product Information Bulletin open up on my screen here, and you can download these from online. You just Google Fujifilm Velvia 50 datasheet or whatever film it is you're using, and you'll find this on Google quite easily. So once you've downloaded it, you open it up, and then with the Fujifilm datasheet you go to the last page, and in the top left hand corner you'll see the characteristic curves, and this shows a curve, and I don't fully understand these, but from the research that I've done, what I can gather is that you determine the dynamic range by looking at the S-curve, and it is the difference between the start of the straightness of the S-curve and the finish. And if what I mean by this is, and if you look at my arrow here, you can see here it starts to curl up at the bottom, and then as you get to the top it starts to curl again. So to determine the dynamic range, it's basically understanding from this point here to this point here, which you can actually see based on the scale on the left hand side, that it's approximately 3 stops. So that's how you determine the dynamic range of your scene. So for Fujifilm Velvia 50, the sweet spot for any exposure is between 3 and 4 stops. So you've been out and you bought a spot meter, and now you have an understanding of your dynamic range of your film. Now we need to explore how actually your light meter works. Now at this point it's important to understand that when you take 1 meter reading with your spot meter, it will present that information based on an 18% grey reading, which when you look at the Ansel Adams zone system, that's zone 5, which is right in the middle, and then at zone 0 you've got black, dark black, no detail, and at zone 10 we have bright white, no detail, bright white. So it essentially gives you the correct exposure for that light, which is great. However, not all scenes have the same light values within them. So this is where we start to get into the dynamic range of an image, and with a light meter it's important to be able to assess the dynamic range of a scene. So when you're out looking for a light meter, it's important that your light meter is able to take more than one reading, memorize it, and then average out the scene to give you an average meter reading, which this Volcanic light meter does. Now, when you're making an assessment of your scene, you do that by taking a meter reading from the darkest area of your scene that you would like to retain detail, put it in the memory, and then you take another meter reading of the lightest area that you would like to retain detail, and you put it in the memory, and then you would average it out. And then once you've done that, you would then go through and evaluate your scene to understand the dynamic range of it, so that you're able to assess whether the dynamic range of your scene will fit within the dynamic range of your film. Sounds quite complicating, but it's actually quite an easy process. So I'm going to demonstrate that quite quickly using my Volcanic light meter. I'm just going to take some meter readings off my screen here. So the first meter reading is going to be in the darkest area that I want to retain detail, so I'll do that. At F8 it's giving me 4 seconds, and then I put that in the memory by pressing the button. So that's now logged in. Now I take another meter reading of the lightest area that I want to retain detail, so I'll do that. And that's giving me half a second, so we put that in the memory. And then we press the average button. And that's giving me an average light meter reading of 2 seconds. And it's also telling me that the dynamic range of this scene is 3 stops, which in terms of Fujifilm Velvia 50, that's perfect. That's kind of right within the sweet spot. So once you've been through and evaluated your scene, hopefully the dynamic range of that scene is within the capabilities of your film. However, that's not always the case, and sometimes you have to make adjustments to fit the dynamic range within the dynamic range of your film. I'm saying dynamic range so many times, it's kind of getting a bit blurry off my tongue. Anyway, so what we have to do in that situation is we have to be able to evaluate the scene, and with the Volcanic L758D, it has a feature built in the viewfinder that as I go through and evaluate the scene by pressing the trigger button with the spot meter over a specific light area, it will tell me what EV value that area is. So if I do that now, and I can explain what that means. So in the darkest area, it's telling me that it's minus 1.9. And in the lightest area, it's telling me 1.8. Which is okay, but say for argument's sake, it's telling me that it's 5 stops, and the main area in my scene is -1, for example, and I don't want that to be -1, I want that to be 0, so I have to have an additional 1 stop of exposure compensation to push that scene up. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm moving my dynamic range of my scene up the Ansel Adam zone system. But because my dynamic range of my film is only 3 stops, ideally only 3 stops, that means that the highlights of my scene are potentially at risk of being blown out and losing detail and ruining the shot. So at this point, if I'm going to do that, then I have to add in graduated filters to block out the additional highlighted areas and bring the scene back within the specification of the film. So it's quite important that we understand that, and you can only do that by using a light meter, and you could possibly do it with the light meter within your camera, but it would be really difficult, and you would really need to be quite good with maths, and it would just add time to exposing your shots, and that could be okay for some people, but for me, I like to be able to do things quite quickly, and having a light meter, ideally a spot meter, really helps with that. So that's it for today's video. If I quickly recap on what we've covered, we've gone over quite quickly how to evaluate the dynamic range of a scene with a light meter, and we've explained how a light meter works, and that if you are just doing one light meter reading, it will present that in 18% grey, which is zone 5 on the Ansel-Adams system, which is great. However, not all scenes have the same light value, so it's important to assess your scene with the spot meter and determine an average value to expose within the dynamic range of your film. We've also explained how to determine the dynamic range of your film, and the way you do that is by you find the datasheet of your film and you read the graphs, the density graphs on there to determine what the dynamic range is. And to be honest, with most slide films it's around 3 to 5 stops anyway. So that's it. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you've learned something, and if you would like to support me, the best way you can do that is right now is to subscribe to my channel. If you would like to leave a comment below, that would be awesome. You know, one thing I would really like to hear is if you have a good understanding of the density graphs on the data sheets, if you can explain that to me, that would be really appreciated. And also check out my Facebook channel and my Instagram channel, and like those pages, follow me. That would be really, really appreciated. So that's it. Bye for now. Thanks for tuning in. Take care. See you soon.